As creative people, most of us like to explore things, and today I wanted to share with you some of my own explorations. They include concepts and works that have influenced me and that I've found useful for looking at design problems in our world in general. Among the ideas I want to show, I think three themes stand out. The first is a notion that as designers we often undulate between being generalists and specialists, or between explorers and professionals. The second theme, tied to the first, involves how we abstract. Art and architecture can historically be seen as a human quest to represent nature. In doing so, we always have to abstract, or translate, a limitless cosmos into our own limited capabilities. Today's attitudes and technology allow us to simulate natural processes to create work and structures that have a deeper resonance with nature's patterns and not just its visual references. Oops. The third theme involves an awareness of the devices we use to make things happen. As creative professionals and human beings, we're constantly making models of reality, going from abstract to something we consider real. Being aware of this process helps us evolve the methods we use to make these models. The models we make and use can be mental, like your point of view or how you understand or model a problem. The models we make are also physical or digital ones, like a foam core or digital study model, to detailed presentation or information-rich BIM models. All these virtual models work in unison to reveal our physical world. I was lucky enough to be part of a local band while studying architecture at Miami University. I learned more about fluid collaboration from that experience than in any other of the architecture studios. As a drummer, I realized that if your collaborators are open, the context you lay down with your rhythm can totally change not only the song's balance, but also its genre or form. The three of us always needed to be open to any quick changes from the other players. This helped me develop an irreverence to prescriptions of style and a deep interest in how we work with patterns. This and other experiences helped me appreciate the role empathizing with another person's point of view has in co-creative processes, especially in architecture and design. After graduate school at the University of Arizona, I started a decade-long tenure at the Jurdy Partnership in Venice, where I was an integral part of many large-scale and domestic and international projects. In 2006, I founded Studio Vass as a full-service creative organization. As a registered architect influenced by a variety of disciplines, I strive to combine art and technology to design and enhance many types and scales of projects. My conceptual explorations help my work evolve, but more importantly, they help others push their project developments forward. As designers, we collaborate to discover a project's potential. As artists, we communicate a project's potential and move it forward. As architects, we help develop this potential into its finest built form. I do what I do because I love the process of exploration, the thrill of discovery, and the satisfaction of creation, whether the creation is a built or finished project or a deliverable that will help move somebody's dream forward. So this is just my perspective, and one thing I'm attempting to get across in this very broad meta overview is the relativity of this and all other perspectives. Awareness of the mental modeling that we do frees us to better understand other people, perspectives, styles, and approaches. The Dressing Shadows project, of which I'm sampling pages from, primarily in the beginning of this deck, is an exploratory art project I'm currently working on about devices and mental modeling. It's an observation on paradigm shifts and also a call to act on paradigm shifting. The work explores the equivalence between words, space, and colors. It currently consists of diagrams, essays, and artwork to explore its central themes. In these diagrams, the one, in this case, everything and nothing, can be divided into two in human experiences, mind and body. It can become a triad by adding a third eye, which divides the mind into mental and spiritual functions. So playing off this theme of the human condition in this model can act like a combination lock and can also be turned into representing, among many other things, the left brain, the right brain, and the frontal lobe. So the quadrant evolves from the triad to become more of a map that we could look back down upon. These diagrams explore the word relationships, while the following diagrams play in a similar way with color. Specialization or vocationalism is vital for execution, and generalization or humanism is vital for exploring. Explorers help you find something you imagine or dream is out there through a process of discovery. It isn't about specializing versus generalizing, it's about those two seemingly disparate aspects within us working together to achieve greater things. I believe abstract and realism should have an open dialogue. The light monad represents generalization as abstraction and sees difference as gradients. The dyad and the triad represent specialization as realization and sees differences as boundaries. Too often these personalities are separated into their own camps, ignoring each other instead of having lively debates and dynamically informing each other. Having extremely rigid borders makes it impossible to evolve, but having no borders at all makes it impossible to define anything or to be human as we know it. As I mentioned, concept design models can be mental, physical, or virtual. I like to use virtual digital models to help explore design problems because of their flexibility and efficiency as an asset to plug into various developmental stages. A doodle or a sketch is on the one end of the abstract spectrum, while a detailed BIM model is at the other end of a realism spectrum. They're both still abstractions, though, and are models of the thing that wants to be built. They are the menu and not the meal. In this model, we choose to see generalization and specialization in terms of scale. You first have to walk through the general in order to get to the specific. Going the other direction, sometimes abstraction is seen as a filter, like you abstract a picture, a specific picture in something like Photoshop by blurring it, etc. In this context, abstraction is about bringing things like ideas, colors, and forms to its primal roots in order to manipulate them more directly, and in this sense, gleaning inspiration from nature as a process of abstraction. The map is not the terrain, the menu is not the meal. They may, however, morph from one to the other. So at what point of scale is what we see the actual terrain? Like from an airplane, the terrain is far below you, and you could say it is the terrain of, say, the Sierra Mountains. However, you don't see the rocks and the trees that make up the terrain as you do when you're hiking through it. Everything is what it is by definition or measure. So at what point is something realistic? At the point of definition. We touch our fingers because our physical existence is defined on that cellular level of skin. That's our physical boundary. So this is another good way to see phases of work in architecture. At what point is the design done? In concept, it is when we arrive at a general consensus about things we've agreed upon would be defined in that phase. Then in the CD phase, we become more specific and have the model finish specifying things like the mullion detail. In reality, we know that the design is not done completely until the construction is finished. And even after that, the building continues to evolve through use, erosion, and renovation. When I talk about abstraction in art and architecture, I'm not so much referring to stylistic preferences or moves, but more to about the way abstraction functions. The method is the awareness of the process. In painting, abstraction can be a simulation of natural processes like erosion. In design, abstraction can be a way to look at things in a more efficient way to make positive change happen faster. You have a set of conditions, which is the context, and then you create the project or painting, which is the content, by responding to those conditions under rules or devices that you choose or that are chosen for you. Science and experience teaches us the relativity of our point of view. We can call this point of view our reality tunnel or bubble. It also goes by names like worldview and vocation. It manifests itself in groups as cultures, religions, corporations, etc. They all depend on a belief system that is a result of our programming. A responsive designer or architect knows how to empathize with another person's reality tunnel or point of view. This page is an interpretation of the ancient Indian fable, The Blind Men and the Elephant, which is a parable about the relativity of our perceptions. For example, as the story goes, the blind man close to the tusk touches the tusk and assumes it's a spear, while the one touching its leg assumes it's a tree trunk. Each one believes they are right, and they are within their limited perceptions. The problem or human condition is they go back to relay this information to their tribe. The friends of the guy touching the tusk believe the elephant is a spear, while the people who share the same belief system of the guy touching the leg believe it's a tree without seeing the elephant. I decided to render this quadrant diagram of the elephant using birds to suggest how thoughts take flight based on cursory observations filtered by your current reality tunnel. The quadrant here above shows how this type of mapping can frame the upcoming converging and diverging cycle in recursive ways. Creation is a process of convergence and divergence. Divergence can manifest itself as framing, categorizing. In personality, it can also be seen as making yourself unique on a positive note or separating yourself from others in a negative one. As psychologist Carl Jung points out, the great problem in psychology is the integration of oppositions. One finds this everywhere and at every level. The one is the stage in which something is unconscious, undifferentiated, like a blank slate or a blank canvas or panel. Next, a polarity arises as the issue moves into consciousness. If the tension is held between oppositions long enough, the third appears as the movement out of tension. Finally, as the issue is fully integrated into the personality as the fourth, the transformed personality is a new whole, and as such is the starting point for any further change as the cycle repeats. Successful evolution, like good design, requires experimentation. In these models, we can interactively move the lenses around like multidimensional combination locks. Usually we do this until things align with our own existing reality tunnel or pre-programmed belief system. We also have a choice to use these new mental models to unlock doors outside of our worldview or comfort zone. There are useful similarities we can draw between our minds and the computer. One interesting connection described in this diagram to the right is how we relate to the world through language and society, and how the computer relates to the virtual world through programming and operating systems. On the world side, the edifice of vocation is a paradigm we use to successfully interface with society. This paradigm has been generated through history in the evolution of language. In a corresponding way, the computer uses specific applications to interface with the user and the virtual environment. It was generated by the evolution of programming language. So oversimplifying this as analogy would be like saying application AutoCAD or Revit is the vocation architect, Excel is businessman, Photoshop is artist, Word is author, etc. The level underneath these vocation roles is human culture that allows them to work. The equivalence here would be seeing certain cultures like ours or anyone else's as a certain type of user interface. Under this, we have the operating system and machine language that supports the user interface, and respectively the philosophy and semantics that support our own human cultural and societal interface. As our diagram to the left suggests, this process is constantly evolving through time. Things once dreamed in previous technology become devices used to imagine newer things that are actualized in subsequent time periods. When the perceived visceral acts and their virtual counterparts meet in time, their modes are reversed. Vocational paradigms are artificial boundaries set up to allow easier commercial interaction. The computer often allows us to break those boundaries, which allows us to take advantage of common patterns across borders. In this chromatiform diagram, layers of color and shape create a code that is cyclically read and rewritten by our perception. Isolating the painting's red, blue, and green channels simulates this idea of divergence. In turn, putting all those channels back together simulates the action of convergence. The shapes are exercises in consolidating forces. As we would say, the mesh of a design model could represent the center line of a structure, but doesn't actually show that structure. We can say the painting's visual force represents the consolidation of oppositions like the inner outer cosmos, foreground and background, or even art and science. We are using the energy of convergence and divergence to render the invisible. In this process animation to the left, it's important to notice the frame around the work is constantly changing. That's because during the process, while I was taking these photos of the oil painting in progress, I would constantly be rotating the panel to work it in the round and make its orientation relative during the process. Fixing its orientation usually happens after its completion or sometimes never. The decision for horizontal or verticality affects its presence. In general, we relate to verticality as someone standing in front of us, and to horizontality as a landscape that we look into. Modeling, mapping, lighting, and rendering is experimental iterating, much like the process animation we were looking at a moment ago. It's like a virtual laboratory. It is the way you can virtually fail a number of times before finding the right solution for the problem. It needs to have a conceptual life. If you go right into the reality, the imagination dies. One of the benefits in working in a flexible design model is the ability to easily iterate and respond to the output. The render and response to it becomes sort of a feedback loop. We usually render hundreds of frames for projects just to see what works best. I'm a fan of 3D Studio Max because I believe it models a broader context of design experiences. In other words, you're developing form, context, materiality, and lighting at the same time in a really flexible way. It also gives you a lot of types of tools to choose from. You're not just limited to one type of exploration or construction paradigm. Parametric modeling is about transformations and having access to a design's engine's DNA, not just their outcome, which is a dead mesh. The parametric modifier stack I'm referring to here has equivalents in other 3D packages using different interfaces. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of the tools in this limited scope, but I will say that I think a modifier stack is like a sentence. Written and spoken words act as operands, modifiers, and transformers in a sentence as they do their digital equivalents in a modifier stack. I will point out that within this stack we can hold many options. In this case, these edit splines on top of each other contain a unique study that can be turned on and off. In most cases, what I'm showing you are quick concept renderings that are meant to be seen more abstractly. Any process animation to the left are some of the studies we captured during the process. The iTower design was part of Songdo International Business District master plan and on-site workshop. We took a very iterative approach to the form of the tower to find the right sync with the client goals and sensibilities. The obsessive-compulsive disorder required to resolve a painting in your own terms or rules and sensibilities is similar to the OCD required to solve a building, but which is mostly based on somebody else's terms and sensibilities. As we saw in the painted stellated landscape process animation, the idea of horizontality versus verticality is a big part of the decision-making process. As noted, verticality usually suggests the presence of a figure, while horizontality suggests the landscape. Some of the time we work with larger offices as a design consultant to explore and provide valuable options in digital assets. At other times I work directly with individuals and developers to help them push their dreams into realities. This project was a competition for the Bexco Convention Center expansion. The various studies we originated play up the potential of the program's sweeping horizontal nature. After the exploration stage, we helped to discover the appropriate form. We can do further work to enhance its visualization, often incorporating work from and collaborating with other professionals like landscape designers and graphics professionals, etc. Other times we hand off the digital assets to the client if they choose to refine it themselves or with others. As these images show, the design of this engine involves reacting to the source of inspiration. I think for important projects there should be a time for exploration, discovery, and creation of an appropriate system or engine. And then you want to run and capture that system until it satisfies all functional requirements and exceeds the desired aesthetic. For me, as low terrace roof and feature elements done at Jerde was an important jump from design's historically symbolic interpretation of nature's form to a modern dynamic interpretation of nature's physical processes. In other words, we're not just making something by using natural proportions. We're making something using a physics-based simulation. In this case, it was draping a virtual cloth over deflector spheres that became the design engine. There was a process of refinement that reacted to the contingencies that would present themselves throughout the process. For example, we used this series of plan sections to find and eliminate any water ponding on the undulating roof surface. Section cuts and rendered underlays from the design model became the source for documentation and other design refinement. The built result is engineered and fabricated from the 3D Studio mesh delivered to Arup, who used it as the center line for the members in their engineering. The Wagner Bureau in turn used this information for its fabrication. The abstract mesh was realized by simply defining that mesh as the center line of the structure. The iterative cycle of running these simulations with hundreds of variations over a period of time can be seen as an example of the virtual visceral cycle we mentioned earlier. The virtual cloth simulator interfaced with the user in cloth terms like shear, stretch, and scale. The cloth type was also an important factor in how stretchy the fabric was. If it was too stretchy, the faces of the mesh, which represented each glazed structural panel, would vary too greatly for efficient production. If it was too rigid, the form would lack contour. So we would cycle through iterations of these physical concerns virtually until we were able to provide a functional mesh to the engineers. It's the abstraction that allowed us to iterate fluidly. The realism and specialization of the structure was applied by the engineers. The elements from the design engine, in this case the deflector spheres, generate the interior forms and the office tower icon to create a deeper architecture unity within the project. The Morongo Resort's feature elements, also done at Jerde, are another example of where the design model's mesh is used for the center line of the structure's fabrication. We see feature design as creation and development of architectural elements designed to inspire and to work endemically with the project. In this case, the design engine used concepts of sacred geometry, specifically the interaction of the torus and the spiral. The built result is fabricated in adherence to the original 3D mesh. As a result, the forms are emotive yet rigorous and provide an experiential level of depth. The 3D model was also used as pre-visualizations and animatics in conceptual studies. Sometimes films or ads use these environments as sets for their products, which I interpret as the physical going back to the virtual. By being able to abstract the problem in a concept model, we're able to quickly provide the client with an impactful vision without the detailed overhead. That said, the model has an inherent rigor that can be refined and seeded for subsequent stages. This proposed iconic retail entertainment venue bridges the two sides of LAX and experientially connects the existing terminals. We developed the architectural forms and articulation based on interpretations of Westfield's planning ideas a number of years back. By approaching this articulation conceptually and the camera moves cinematically, we were able to deliver the project and its story in a visually compelling way. A humanistic abstract overview might better explain the recursive nature of how we actually work. In concept design, we usually first envision the forest and then the trees, and in subsequent phases onto the branches and the leaves. Scale is irrelevant when thinking and working in the abstract. On the other hand, scale is everything when you're working toward the specific. This master plan proposal in Dubai shows how we can efficiently invent and integrate large-scale formal moves to provide big pictures and gestures. In this case, the design evolved from the animated forms, which studied various geometries, including different types of spirals and waveforms. The design process for this artist studio for Robert Graham and Angelica Houston was dynamic. The basic design criteria was initiated by sculptor Robert Graham and developed by his son Stephen. The warehouse form is conceived to complement their sculptural residence next door. Up until the beginning of construction, the 3D model was an important design tool. Utilizing posted interactive VRML models, which were precursors to the current VR panoramics we use, the client was able to interactively partake in the design process. The intelligent design model was used for everything from exterior design studies to structural mock-ups. We then cut sections of this model as the base for the entire set of architectural documents which we produced. As design facilitators, our value-added techniques help push this project to completion. Once again, sculpting a geometry with rigor and inspiration from nature led to the dynamic formal partie and features for the Lotus Center, which is a multi-use complex we did for 5 Design. We carved the towers in a perspective to create dynamic massing and to take advantage of the moves. Collaboration is always key. In this case, the client provided the armature with direction and let our techniques create the architectural expression of the project. Given the constraints of an extremely tight deadline and a strictly zoned site, we were able to create an engaging vision. The design of the Xi'an Cultural Center for the city of Baoji, China, mirrors the painting process we described earlier. Reacting to the landscape in architecture is equivalent to reacting to the surface on a painting, especially if we're painting on a wood panel. Responding to the amazing topography and reacting to the local spirits, our design was conceived during a short and intense on-site charrette. The undulating spines of architecture and circulation in the Central Valley are flanked by residential and entertainment components that reside in adjacent portions of the landscape. The gondola that starts from the lower icon tower and terminates at the hotel lets you experience the mountain in breathtaking luxury. The raised undulating path provides a relaxing journey, while taking the trails on the ground brings you closer to the natural surroundings. For the concept design of Marvel Stark Labs in Dubai Land for Chimera, we again used a toroidal design engine. And this time it was inspired by the particle collider featured in the Iron Man movie. We went through many iterations to achieve the optimal blend of formal impact and ride experience. At the same time, circulation and other practical considerations were thoroughly studied and documented. Animatics provided during the process included user point of views from the rides, which informed the evolution of the structure. We developed 2 separate design approaches for the Robot Land exhibition building in Seoul, Korea for Delaney Harmon and Pico. Both were emotive of robots and used innovative display and projection technologies. As with other projects, the plans, elevations, and sections were gleaned from the design model and delivered to the team. For this project, we also developed experiential animations which focused on showing how the choreography of different media overlays can affect the building experience, thus blurring where the structure stopped and where the media began. An established bass player and songwriter described to me his dream to build an epic concert experience machine along with a simple sketch. Riffing off this sketch and subsequent jam sessions, we developed concept and schematic designs of this working and patented immersive structure. As an ongoing project we are helping to push forward, we will be excited to see it in action. Among others, the late Chester Bennington of Lincoln Park was one of my client's partners, helping to vet the project with funding from a variety of sources. A jam session is a good model for collaboration. Sessions musicians, for example, are required to be flexible and professional. The film industry regularly uses animatics to conceptually develop stories, sets, and camera moves. A flexible concept design model can also be seen as an evolvable animatic, while a BIM production model can be seen as more of a final filming in which it's a lot harder to make broad brush adjustments. For the Mar Vista Lofts in LA for RD Green development, we were asked to design and produce a modern building within significant budgetary constraints. The architectural design was developed in 3D, which we later translated into developing the plans and the elevations. In these, the idea of a design engine is mainly about an economic kit of parts and not as extravagant as some of the other projects. The design boundaries were laid out early in the form of a plan that is driven by site, code, comfort, profit, and budget. The examples in this spread show the flexibility of this design strategy for feature elements that can parametrically evolve as the program and design attitudes change. The ability to explore many design engines simultaneously allows us to efficiently arrive at the most effective approach given the aspirations and limitations present in each project. The built project on top is a Hwaseong Stadium, for which we did many organic studies, much like the one shown for the Yongin Stadium on the left and the bottom. For that, we explored two main directions. The first was related to the undulating organic terrain, and the others were inspired by the beauty of crystal formations, both of which you can see iterating here in the process animation, where we're trying to explore two very various approaches, but we're able to kind of make a lot of modifications on them quickly. And finally, the Vision Machine is an immersive VR project we developed to explore some of the ideas being developed in dressing shadows. It can be viewed in Gear VR or cardboard compatible headsets with links here to the left. Now, I'm going to show this in its native viewer because we were having some problems playing this online here. So I'm going to switch to this. So we've used this technology to conceptually design and present a major developer's vision for the Mall of the Future, as well as other venues we are not at liberty to share yet. Inside the laboratory of the mind, we create devices to shape the world and help us understand who we are. The deck in front of us on the red pedestal explores color. The device on the green pedestal behind us explores time. The first, I'm having trouble pointing to here. This is a lot more fluid when you have the inside of a headset. The first device's form is derived from a painted metal landscape. When we step inside, the four walls of the room disappear and become gradients of color that envelop us in its own terms. As a metascope, it becomes a mirror or a microscope or a telescope. From inside this painted world, the colors propel us into other dimensions. Conscious of itself, it references infinity. This other device that we're now in is a metascope created through geometric exercises whose form represents the concept of reality bubbles. The cross-section through the form is the present moment cutting through time. These devices are models of our consciousness, which is like a record player gliding needles on the manifold of cosmos while producing records at the same time. In this context, a French sociologist said, "Space is what prevents everything from being in the same place. Language is what prevents everything from meaning the same thing." And I would add that time is what prevents everything from happening at once, and that color is what keeps everything from being black and white. Thanks for your time. And we can open it up to any questions or comments. Thanks. In undergrad, I wasn't too into them. I think we were just developing like, early versions of DOS, 3D Studio back then. And I went to work for a couple of years after graduating undergraduate back in Cleveland. And I kind of used that time to figure out exactly what I didn't want to do. And so I worked for a number of firms and kind of saw what the lay of the land was, what type of work I liked, what type of work I didn't like. And I decided to go back to, after a couple of years, I decided to go back to grad school and use that time to really focus on what I kind of seemed to enjoy the most. Because during that time, I was really getting into early versions of DOS 3D Studio Max, because I saw like how difficult it was to construct perspectives by hand, for example, because I really thought like that was really awesome to be able to design something in that sense and not just from a plan or elevation. There's a lot of advantages to that, as we know. So that got me into that, and throughout the years we've just been evolving with that program, which is interesting. If you kind of sit with a program for that long, you kind of see like the nuances of how things change and whatnot, and how like the ideas of that changing user interface I was talking about. It's pretty interesting, because your work changes. Your response to the software changes, so it's kind of a dynamic thing. I'm trying to think of there's a lot of things. That's one of the points I was trying to get across too, is when you're kind of going through a lot of things, like different kinds of books and whatnot, you're always kind of trying to stay open to all these different ideas. One that is kind of explains, it actually is a kernel to what this Dressing Shadows project was about, was Robert Anton Wilson's Prometheus Rising. Cheesiest cover. It's like this airbrushed robot thing. It's a sign of its time, but it really lays out a lot of interesting principles he got mainly from Timothy Leary, psychologist Timothy Leary. And that's where I was basing a lot of the quadrant diagrams from. There's some, and that leads to that, which is, this idea that you can look at a lot of very disparate problems and ideas, but if you format them in a similar way, you can find similarities between them. And that's what I meant by this idea of this combination lock thing. So anyways, to answer that question, that was a big one for me. And then there's a lot of other ones that are just really interesting from a standpoint of the equivalence between the computer and the world. One of which is Gödel, Escher, Bach by Hofstadter, I believe his name was, where he actually describes 3 stories at the same time. And this was really cool to me. So I don't know anything about like mathematical equations. I see a sigma or something, my mind turns off completely. So he's trying to describe a mathematical theory that Gödel came up with that basically, it's more complicated than the way I'm going to say it, but it basically disproves the absolute certainty that we can have about mathematics. Don't quote me on that, but that's kind of what it was going after. But so he's writing a whole series of fugues based on this, and then in contrast, he's writing the same thing based in talking about how Bach writes his music, his fugues, which I understood a lot better because I understand music and how that, and it really turned me on to a lot of interesting things about Baroque music and all that. But what was important was understanding that analogy, and then reading that, and then he went on and talks about Escher and how he talked about stuff like recursive things. And we all know Escher prints, how you look at it and things can flip, or it can go on into infinity and whatnot. And by exploring these things side by side, 2 things that I was really into, one thing that I wasn't, got me much more interested in that other thing, So that to me was an interesting one too. And you know, I should have a list of these, but I mean, there's just so many that you end up cribbing from, and you read, and then you go back to them later, and then you realize like that you've kind of been reproving some of this stuff. You know, you forget that you read it, and then you're like, you think that you thought of it or something, and then you read it again, you're like, oh man, this is where I kind of got that. A lot of structuralist stuff. Back when I was going to school in undergrad, everybody was into the deconstruction stuff, you know, the Derrida, the Foucault, and all those guys. So, you know, there's a lot of that I found interesting. You know, Nietzsche, of course, the way he writes and, you know, talks about things, I think is a big one too, that I would think, you know, just as a thing, to keep it interested, to keep the mind interesting. As an academic study, you know, I'm not, you know, proposing it, I'm just saying it's kind of an interesting way to kind of see how we work as creative professionals, because, you know, in essence, the way that we describe the world, you know, we're describing it through language all the time, you know, and then when we're doing something, we're designing something, we're designing our sets, or we're painting a picture, trying to express something, you know, we're describing the world through that mechanism, you know, and by the deeper you understand one, the more you can kind of make analogies to what you're doing with color or what you're doing with building forms and things like that. So that's why I think, thank you for the question, because I think that's exactly why it's relevant, I think, for design, you know, students to explore some of these, you know, ideas and stuff, and not necessarily think they're just for academics. What's interesting about when you're trying to build something bigger, like the feature roof, or you know, or the tours I was showing you before, and then I'll bring up a personal project or a smaller project. Basically, every fabricator, every engineer wants to work on something like that, right? They're, you know, it's a business, not just from a business standpoint, but especially if it's a nicer project, they're always eager to, you know, try to help. In terms of that roof project, some of the methods that we used, you know, in the beginning, actually for both those projects, in the beginning, the first barrier is always a certain layer of people that are going to say, no, it's not going to work. I mean, just simply, no, it's not going to work. And that's when I refer to this idea of, you know, this ultra professional, this ultra specialist that knows exactly what. There's a couple reasons for this. One reason is that maybe they already have a contract, or they know how much they're going to get, and they know how much more it's going to cost them to help you figure out the problem. Or maybe they're just not, you know, collaborative in that sense. For that solar undulating roof project, we actually used a local office in Europe at first, and had that exact same pushback, you know. And then from another project, this guy from the English office came by, and we had, you know, some meetings and the collaborations with them, and they pretty quickly figured out this is what we need to do. You know, we just turn these into moment member. You know, there's a very rational way to do it, and it's going to cost this much, and you know, you kind of break it up, and nothing in that. Aside from the fabrication, so the cool thing is a lot of this stuff has been evolving while we're evolving, right? So the fabrication of like all those members, for example, and each one of those pieces of glass, they all had to be different. But the key was that you had to keep them within the bed of the build, right? So that was the trick to this whole thing. So there's this whole analysis, you know, this process where you're doing the creation, and then you're doing this analysis, and then you see in the analysis there's a lot of problems there, and then you go back and then you kind of say, well, let's make adjustments. But then, now does it look good? Now does it look boring? You know, is it, you know, if we keep all these members to this great, incredible tolerance, you're going to have this thing that just looks like a piece of phyllo dough on top of, you know, apples, instead of something that's kind of curvaceous and stuff. So that was kind of one of the you know, one of the ways that, you know, we interface with that. The other one was in terms of the Morongo canopy. The first engineer that we brought on board, well, we were bidding it to engineers/fabricators. The first group came back. They completely misinterpreted the thing. Not misinterpreted. They re-engineered it by completely making it a diagrid structure. Like he just simplified it. And we, you know, we knew structurally this is inherently okay. You know, it's a extruded barrel vault, essentially. You know, there's intuitively, you just knew that this could happen in this way, you know, especially how these spirals worked and all that. And they were just giving us this kind of, you know, really bunk version. And then, you know, finally we found some people that really recognized it, came back to us with the same model that we gave them, the center line of, and all they did was they showed us how they're going to make it work. You know, these are going to be moment connect, these are going to be point connection, whatever. You know, I'm not as intimate with the everything that they're doing, but it was that kind of a process. You know, that you kind of have to find the right people that have connections to that kind of technology. And then finally, there's this one that's tied to this dressing shadows thing. There's an object I've been trying to fabricate, and I realized because there's such a jump in like scales when you're talking about like a detail. So in particular, this thing is something that kind of fractals into itself. There's a bigger component, and obviously the smaller component you could make with a 3D print, no problem. The bigger one is like really would be cost prohibitive to, you know, our organization to actually pull it off to the size that we'd want. But then you're figuring out ways to kind of bridge those gaps. And that's one thing that I'm really interested in working on right now, is bridging the gap. Like, so it's not necessarily like the whole building doesn't necessarily have to be 3D printed. Maybe there's parts of it that are the specific details or whatever, and somehow by integrating it, not just artificially as like a moniker somewhere, you know, or the way that, you know, people make apartments where you buy the little cornice from Home Depot and put it on there, and that's your special thing. You know, you kind of somehow figure out how to integrate it together and integrate these different scales together. You know, you kind of pick these and you kind of try to choose the things, you know, that are more in line of what you feel you can do the best. But at the same time, there's a fine line between knowing how much you can afford to do that, you know. I mean, that's why they call that kind of the architect's profession, the gentleman's profession. The easiest way to do it is if you're already making money off of something else, you know, and then you can afford to, you know, bankroll some of this stuff, you know. That's why, to me, I'm proud to be able to have been part of some of these things on a commercial level. You know, most of this stuff is in a retail and whatever environment. But, you know, like I said, throughout your career, you always you look at every challenge, and this is why I kind of generically have that term design engine. If you can wrap your head around that and make that interesting for yourself, you know, you could take any problem, and, you know, I showed you that apartment building, for example, which you see a billion of those everywhere in Santa Monica that are, you know, 10 times better because they have 10 times the budget. But, you know, that was a problem, you know, and we took it on. We needed the work, and we're like, let's see what we could do with it, and you know, this is what we came up with, right? I think there's a million things, you know, that on a day-to-day, you know, way you could find interest in. You know, even if you're working on something, you're commissioned to do something that isn't necessarily a design portion, like you're trying to, you know, help somebody push an idea forward. You know, then you kind of try to get more aggressive in terms of how your representation style is more in line with what's going on, or how the lighting is affecting what the outcome is. So it's this. I think whenever you're doing, you can always find something interesting in it. And I think the other thing, which I mentioned before, is it's always good to choose things that you really think have, you know, some really cool potential, especially if you can afford to do it until the next project comes along. And like I said, a lot of firms, I think, do that as well. I mean, unless you're Frank Gehry and, you know, a few others who really have that capability to keep, you know, turning down stuff to people come to them for exactly that brand, you know. And that's everybody's dream. I mean, it'd be great 10 years from now, you know, come back and do that and say that's all we do, right? But, you know, I think for the most part, most companies have that kind of yin-yang relationship with things. You know, there's the production, there's the work, the bread and butter work, and then there's some of the work that is a little bit more inspirational, but you end up finding inspiration in some of those more mundane things as well. Yeah, I wish I was a better businessman like Gary to actually really think that way or have people, because that is obviously something that would be a really interesting, venture. Because I mean, obviously there's that argument that people bring up, if you're using Photoshop, let's say, you're not the artist, Photoshop is the artist, and same with, obviously we say, no, it's just a tool, but there is this thing about it that, yeah, there is a certain amount of design, engines or things that you can use. That's why, for example, like in BIM, you're less likely to pull a move like this, like Revit, let's say, because it's going to be really hard for those tools to kind of do that. As far as taking a technology like Max, and not to mention, if you think about the business models that like Autodesk uses, and something like that, and having, a brand like Gary, who already was using CATIA, I mean, they're kind of using it, and they're a good foil, I think, for the way I think about it, because they go, I think, in a different direction. They create a physical model, and that's their collaboration tool, that's their thing. And then they digitize it, and then the work really starts to happen. They get technical, I wouldn't say quickly, but the digital process is much more on the back end than the front end. So I think, with the way that I'm saying, and it is kind of sad, because I think 3D Studio, not sad, but the reality of it is, I think Autodesk, has, and this is something that I was alluding to before, in the beginning, when you're thinking about all these programs, when you're a student, I mean, one of the things that excited me the most was the fact that it does break away a lot of these vocational boundaries. I mean, 1 minute you could be thinking like an architect and design, and then the next minute you're like, well, how do I really want to make this space evocative? Well, let's bring it into Max, put some cool lights. Well, how do we make that? Let's pull it into Premiere to, edit some cool music with it to make it, this and that. So you're crossing a bunch of vocational boundaries at once. Adobe Creative Suite still allows you to do that, which is, I'm a big fan of their software because of that. They're proponents of that. Autodesk recently, I think they've kind of gone almost the other direction, where they're really trying to say, hey, Revit, you're an architect, you should be using Revit. Max is still around because they're saying if you're in media, or if you're in the gaming industry, and maybe visualization, we'll give that to you as an architect, but yeah, that's what that's for. And they're not really going out of their way and saying like, hey, there's some amazing tools here that go beyond what we normally use as students as concept tools. And I'll say like SketchUp or, I mean, Rhino's an incredibly sophisticated tool, especially when you're doing freeforming and product design. But I think in terms of the amount of, and from what I know of it, it's more of a NURBS-based modeler, and it, there aren't as many paradigms of modeling or ways to model, which is fine for some problems, but in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of when you're starting from that really abstract plane of looking at the forest thing, it's really cool to see all these different ways to approach it. So with, so what do you do with that? I mean, how would you, make a software that is, competes in that kind of a business, right? I mean, that's really the thing. I mean, that's, I think, the only reason why Gary, was able to do that is because he has got such a big cachet with the thing, right? And it's cool because he is able to kind of make a new paradigm for a lot of people. But I think, one thing to take away from that too is, you can't necessarily take anything that one person says about their software for 100% truth. I remember back in the day when you're talking about being interviewed for a book, something about computers and architecture or whatever, and when it came out, it was this hardback, some guy that's known to do these coffee table books, and I'm reading it, and he's listing all these softwares, and he's basically, I was one of the people that would mention something, and he just listed like the top ones, and back then, and they're totally different than what they are now, right? And he would just not only mislabel, but and you're kind of getting this idea like, wait, what's the software that he's, so if you don't already know this stuff, you're going to some of these books that are really more glam kind of based, things of people know they'll buy it because it's a cool topic in whatever, architecture or this and that. and you'll get almost misled to saying like, this is the only way to do it, you know. So I think that's, you know, one of the things that I think if you're trying to do something in software, it's got to be a business, and businesses tend to do that. They're going to say, this is how you use our product, you know. Apple too, sometimes, you know, that's a whole other thing. But, you know, in terms of paradigms and being, you know, how we get manipulated and all that other stuff. But that's it would be great to do that if, like I said, you have to be really working on it from a different mind, you know, more of a business mind too, so. To be perfectly honest, some of that stuff I think gets framed. So there's also this idea of framing around, you know, the content. So we make a piece of content and it comes with a frame. You're influenced by it certainly, right? So for example, that the Zolder roof comes to mind again, because that one in particular, there were specific points in the process that we were getting inspiration from specific things. One was in cultural, in Warsaw, there's this type of tree that is ubiquitous in their streets and blah, blah, blah. So that was one of the things that we're clinging on to. And, you know, which was kind of, in a way, I thought was kind of putting us in a nowhere, you know, sometimes you can't beat a dead horse. Like if it's not working for you, you kind of, you know, let it go a little bit and you let something else happen. And this is almost cynical, but I mean, everybody's thought about this when you're, you know, presenting something. You know, I don't think it's terrible when sometimes, and people won't tell you this because it sounds inauthentic, but I don't think it is, because whatever you've made, it's already part of, you know, something that you've been thinking about before. But the fact that you frame something after you do it, you know, when you say something like, well, for example, the Morongo Casino, this is a funny story. They actually, you know, so I talk about it the way I talk about it because I'm into toruses and spirals and all that. And, you know, after it opens and, you know, you start seeing the graphics and all that stuff, you know, you see the billboard, they turn it into this giant desert flower, right? So it's like, you know, so there's that. There's the culture of the commercial culture. But then also at the same time, before that was happening, you know, we were having graphic designers looking at logos based on that form, but abstracting it more into the Morongo tribes, you know, moniker or whatever, you know, whatever they're using. So that stuff was happening after, you know, the fest. So it's kind of like this back and forth, I think, between that, you know. And as far as like actual culture, I mean, you know, you just can't escape it in terms of, you know, popular culture or, you know, how you feel. I mean, all that stuff we were trying to relay about this idea of the relativity of our point of view and stuff, you know, that's part of culture that's happening now. You know, what do we trust in social media? I mean, you know, how truthful is anything? Politics has obviously never been, but, you know, and then, you know, you're questioning all these things, and that's good. I think that's a good thing, and that's part of reacting to culture the way that it is. Specifically, in terms of, you know, projects, I wouldn't say that we necessarily, you know, have had much experience just thinking about something sociologically, specifically culturally, but, you know, if those kind of projects would arise, that'd be great. That's another element or another engine that we could kind of use in that system. But I can't point to a lot of them that was very specific about that, you know, the way that you meant it. You know, but you know what I mean? But you could relate it to different things. Culture.
Any final questions? Thank you very much, Al.
Thank you. Thank you.